Look at that. We already got 4K in the middle, guys, before it hangs action. How sick.
Hi everyone, welcome to the channel. I am the PLO Sniper. I am a live PLO player who really enjoys to play and talk about Pot Limit Omaha. If you're wondering why I'm wearing a mask, I direct you to go into my first video. I go into detail about why I'm wearing a mask, my playing credentials, and etc. So recommend that you see that. When it comes to Pot Limit Omaha hands, I believe that every meaningful or significant hand comes down to one key decision, and that will dictate the outcome of the hand. So what I intend to do in my videos is to explore these hands from the person who has to make the key decision, starting from pre-flop all the way until the decision is made. I welcome any feedback, and I hope you guys share any comments or views that you have differently. We'd love to start a dialogue.
75 to go.
Okay, so we're playing 5, 10, 25 Pot Limit Omaha, Best Bet live stream. We have a $75 straddle, and we have a call in the hijack. So now the action is to us, and we have the 8 high double suited rundown, H653. This is a very beautiful hand, and it's a nice hand to play these cash games. But let's talk through when this hand has value. So when there's an under the gun straddle and a limper, you now have the small blind, big blind, the original straddle, and then the double straddle, and now you have a call. So you have 5 players ahead of you who have money in the pot already. So this hand really plays well when you can get it to heads up and you're just against one other hand. Even though you're in position, it doesn't play as great multi-way because you're just so frequently to flop the second best hand, right? So often you're going to flop bottom 2 pair, you're going to flop the low end of the straight, you're going to flop the worst of the flush draw, and you're going to find yourself in situations that can be avoided with being a little more disciplined pre-flop. So in this scenario, I like going full pot to try to block out some of the other hands in the blinds, or to just fold, which sucks with such a pretty hand, but I think it's actually the best thing to do. So let's see what Hang does here. So it looks like he elects to call. And as I mentioned before, I think this is the worst of all 3 options because it's going to invite other players in. And as we see, Shooter calls with 10-9-8, a hand that normally would have folded if a 3-bet. Nate comes in with the King Jack 6-5, another hand that would have folded. Peter comes in with the King Jack 9-7, and then you also let in the Ace Queen 9 deuce. So in this scenario, instead of 3-betting and getting heads up, with a hand that you actually don't do well against because it has you pipped or covered, now you're going 3 ways. And if you look at the equities, I think it has the equities here pre-flop. I guess this is the flop equities. But essentially the takeaway is that, you know, it's hard for you to win this hand going 5 ways unless you somehow just flop the nuts, which is hard to do. So let's see what happens in the next key decision point here. Okay, so here's our second decision point in the hand. The board comes 7 high, making the nuts 4-5. We have the hijack player who limped in, who once the action was checked around to him, he bets 150. So he bets 150 into a pot of 450, so 1/3 pot. And what does this mean? You know, a lot of hands are going to want to bet 150 here. if you just have the nuts in a redraw, you might want to bet small to try and induce action, so you can go ahead and get all the money in. If you have like a 6, 7, 8, 9, and you just kind of want to fold out some worse, or just some hands that have equity, or if you have a pair and a straight draw, you can make a small bet, and you're going to fold out some hands that do quite well to your one pair and a straight draw that don't want to call a bet instead of just checking. But you also have to think about it in Hank's position here. This guy is betting into 4 players, right? So he's usually going to have a hand he wants to go with. Seems unlikely he would make such a smallish bet with a hand that couldn't sustain action. So what decisions do we have? We can either call the 150. I think folding is out of question, just given your equity. Even if the guy has the nuts, you're typically going to have great equity against that hand, and he's only bet 1/3 pot. You could raise. However, raising, I'm not sure what that accomplishes. The only hands that are going to continue are hands that have you beat. So let's see what the action is and what is.
In the main event this last year, I believe top 50 if I'm not mistaken. Hang is going to pot.
Okay, so it looks like Hang decided to raise. He raises it to 600, which is a little bit less than pot. It's not a full pot raise, but it looks like it's a raise that just wants to ISO, I don't know, maybe one pair that and a gutter. As I mentioned, I think the full pot size raise here is not really accomplishing anything, right? So if you have the 6-3, what hands are going to continue? You're going to get called by 7-6, which you're not doing great against. You're obviously going to get called by 4-5, or a set of sevens. All hands that you're not excited to get the money in. And this goes back to the pre-flop, why, and all those hands are likely, right? Because it was just called 5 ways pre-flop. So you have to assume every strong hand is out there on this type of board, right? People are going to see flops for cheap, especially in these cash games with all types of 7-7, 6-6, 3-3, 4-5. So there's not really a lot of hands that once you make this raise that you can continue with. I understand the process of trying to protect equity, but given how many players are in the pot, it just doesn't feel like a hand strong enough to try to push such a small margin. There's no hands you're really doing well against. So let's continue the action and see what happens.
Shooter getting it in as well with a full wrap. Any 5, 8, 9, 10. Wow, big pot brewing, guys. Yak has the nuts right now. He's like, we're chopping, or somebody has a set here. A lot of different combos. No flush draws to worry about yet. Thanks, sad.
Okay, and now we've arrived to the key decision point of the hand. So, of everything we mentioned before, we're now facing an all-in bet. It looks like the small blind went all in for $5.95 on top of my bet, so less than the original $600 bet. And now the original raiser, who bet 1/3 pot, is going all in. So sitting in my position, what does this mean to me? Usually when someone bets 3 bets, they have the nuts with a redraw. I think that should be the first thing that you should assume, especially how deep they are relative to this game. Now it's 5-10-25. It looks like he is going all in for, let's see what's the all in amount. So he's going all in for 2,300. So it means he started the hand with around 39 or 3,500. Which essentially, with the $25 straddle, he's playing, around 150 big blinds or so, a little bit more than that. So what does this imply? Now, there was a $75 straddle, but because there was no raise of the straddle, it's hard to think of it as they're playing effectively less than 100 big blinds because there was no pre-flop raise over the straddle. So let's just assume the straddle was like a blind raise and they're playing with the normal stacks. So you have someone willing to get over 100 big blinds in on 7-6-3 with, over a raise and it all in. So it's always the nuts. In these live games, it's always the nuts. So now, if you're Hang and you have this decision point, what can you do? You have 600 in. The pot is around $4,000. So you're going to have to call another $1,700 here into a pot of 4,000. So you're getting, what is that? You're getting in between 2 and 3 to 1. A little bit less than 3 to 1. So, if you're getting 3 to 1 exactly, you need about 25% to call off. Just it becomes a pure math problem. And I think this is a fold, right? Like you're putting in the money, you're against the nuts, and against the straight nuts, you're not doing that well. And if you calculate in the third player, what hand is the third player going to have? He's either going to have a set or he's going to have a higher straight draw or also the straight as well. So just against those range of hands, you're not doing that well. You don't have those many outs. And I think you should just find a fold, in my opinion. Let's see what Hang decides to do.
Yak has a big hand as well, obviously with the nuts currently, but it has a big redraw. Backdoor hearts as well.
Part of the day so far. Part of the day so far. We didn't have more, maybe.
Look at that. We already got 4K in the middle, guys, before it hangs action. How sick. Gamble, let's go.
And he announced gamble, let's go. So yeah, he put the money in. He just said, fuck it, let's gamble and see what happens. And I guess he convinced himself that, with the backdoor spades, the full house outs, and the straight outs, that frequently enough he'll make the best hand. And, this is also interesting. He put the money in and said, we're going to run it 2 times. And I've also noticed this in live cash games that, if you agree to run it twice, people will just put the money in bad shape because they figure they'll break even. They'll win one of the runouts. So I encourage everyone to run it twice because, you get people to stack off way lighter than they would if it were one time, in my opinion. Even though it doesn't matter from a math perspective, for some reason it impacts the psychology of the game. Let's see the result.
2 times. All right, looks like we are running it twice. 3-way all in. 5,700 in the middle, guys. Holy. Oh, ace. Yak is going to scoop one. And Shooter's going to get the other.
Okay, so it looks like Hang got scooped. He ended up being against the made straight, which, was pretty obvious as played. And then on the second run out, the higher straight came in with the guy who went all in with the short stack with the 8-9. So they chopped up his money. I think the takeaway from this hand really is while the key decision kind of was after there was a lot of money committed into the pot and, Hang convinced himself that he needed to call off as a result of how much money was out there. And, depending on what he thinks they have, maybe the math was right from that perspective. But, the real mistake in this hand was made pre-flop. When you're playing these 8-high rundowns, these double suited rundowns, they look very pretty, but they can get you in a lot of trouble as seen as this hand, because it's so frequently going to flop second best. So my advice, or I think the learnings that we can all take from this hand, is that, you know, when you have these hands, you want to try to reduce the amount of players who see the flop. So you should either be coming in for a raise, or you should be folding the hands. If you try to take these flops, you try to take flops with these hands 4 or 5 ways, even if on the button, you're often going to find yourself putting in a lot of money when you're getting the worst of it, as we saw in this hand. Great. So that's it for today. Please drop comments on kind of how you would play the hand differently, or your thoughts, and love to hear from you all. Thank you.